Right, welcome everybody to this webinar this afternoon, brought to you by the Waikato and Bay of Plenty Network of Expertise. I'm Andrew Marshall. I'm the Kaiarahi for Bay of Plenty and Waikato. This webinar will be recorded and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. We'll also be repeating this webinar next week because there are a number of people who can't turn up today. We will repeat it, but we also can add to it. And as the webinar plays on, we encourage you to send through questions using the chat on Zoom, and we'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can in the time we've got. If we can't get to some of the questions, we will send the answers in the email at the end as well. So today I am joined by Jason Sharma, all the way from South Korea. Jason and I have been working and teaching maths and statistics at Rotorua Senior High for the last 3 years. Since the school started. I want to just give you a little bit of a background to the school because it's real key when it comes to how we've been able to integrate the maths that we've been doing. The senior high opened in the north of Hamilton 3 years ago with the intention of being an innovative modern school where we were, as teachers, were encouraged to try new things. The whole school was open plan with breakout rooms. All the academic learning is done in integrated modules with numbers of students ranging from 20 to 50 on average. Every module has 2 teachers, one from each of the subjects that are being taught in that module, and the lessons held for 90 minutes each. That's how the school began, and of course in the first year we just had year 11s, the second year we had year 11s and 12s, and then last year the full year 11s, 12s and 13s. The modules in the first 2 years were open to year 11s and year 12s, so they're combined because the school was doing a 2-year level 2 program. Okay, so that's a bit of the background. The process there was a process, an involved process that was developed to determine which subjects would be paired up and when, and it took a lot of things into account, such as the fact that maths and English were compulsory, so they were never paired up as a module, otherwise you'd get way too many numbers in a module like that. The subjects had to be spread out. Teaching experience had to be taken into account, the contact time of each teacher, the spread of the subjects, and also subjects that have a genuine connection with each other, also subject progressions, and even teacher passions. All were considered when first pairing up these modules. So today, Jason and I will give you a snapshot of some of the modules that we did with a few of the examples. We won't cover everything. We're hoping to continue this at the end of year conference for Waikato and Bay of Plenty. So I'm going to hand over to Jason now, get him to co-host here, and he'll be able to
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
Share his screen.
Okay. All right. Yes, I'm the host now. Hi, everyone. So my name's Jason, as Andrew said. Been teaching for around 7 years now. So I started teaching in East Auckland, Tamaki College for 3 years, and then I moved to Hamilton to start teaching with Andrew at Rotorua. So I am on leave without pay right now in South Korea teaching, but I'll be back soon. And I assume a lot of people are watching the COVID update. So yeah. Crazy times. Anyway, I will quickly share a presentation because without that, I'll get quite off task quickly. So, yeah, so when Andrew asked me to do this, participate in this webinar, I think what I really wanted to share with everyone is just a quick overview of I guess, our journey and how we managed to integrate each of our standards with another subject. So this is the subjects I've taught with over the last 3 to 4 years. I do specialize in statistics. So you can see here is the standards I taught with, and here are the subjects I taught with. And here are the standards of the other subjects that I taught with too. So you can see the majority of the subjects I taught with were the social sciences, PE, a couple of and biology, and Te Reo Māori. So when Andrew gets his part, he can share more around how you integrate the mathematical standards. But yeah, so that's a brief overview. Let me change the slide. Yeah, so I'll walk you quickly through how we develop the unit. So as Andrew said, teachers, pairings were made at the middle management level. So, sorry, I'm just trying to, okay. Yes, so pairings are made at the middle management level. So for example, Andrew would pair up the maths teachers with other subject teachers, taking into account, I guess, as he said, interest of the teachers and I guess kind of themes that we want to be teaching. Second step was once the pairings were made, we had some time to kind of brainstorm ideas and concepts with the partners that you were paired up with. And so this often happened at the beginning of the year or halfway through the year if it was semester 2. Then once you got with your partner, so for example, if I was with a PE teacher, we would sit down and we would look at possible contexts that we could teach our subject within. So oftentimes I would ask the other teacher, tell me a little bit about your subject, what standard are you hoping to do, and how can we work together in creating a unit of work. And we also looked at contexts that work well with the assessments that we want to offer, which was within the 2-year plan. Once we kind of looked at that, then it's as you can imagine, co-teaching and developing a unit with another teacher requires a lot of conversation around things other than the module itself. So looking at logistics, so how will we teach together? How would time be allocated? What are our classroom expectations? And how do we meet? One thing to note, as I think Andrew said last week, was meeting times are often done outside of the teaching time. So you would have to often use your non-contact. And so, yeah, that creates other challenges, which we'll get to. So I'll share with everyone one example of a module I did and go through a few of the things I went through. So the standard I did, this is the most recent module I did, was a social studies unit. And so that was, the module was called Locked and Loaded. So you often do give your module a kind of fancy name so that students can read it and kind of get a good picture of what the module might be about. So this standard, the unit context after we discussed, we would look, at the time, there was the topical issue was gun violence in the USA. So we wanted to look at that issue from a statistical point of view and then also a social science point of view. So the social studies teacher I was paired up with, part of her assessment was to analyze and write a critique about a topical issue, a social issue. So that was the issue of the time. So how do we, excuse me. So how do we begin? Before I go on, there's this term that we kind of use when you are paired up. So you often have a host subject and a leech subject. So the host subject is the subject that will provide the majority of the context. So in this case, it was social studies. So social studies was the context because obviously gun violence in the USA is a social issue, and the leech, which is maths or statistics usually, comes in and tries to kind of add value and use the context to for the students to learn from. So I'll quickly go over to our planner. Now this is the real planner that we use. It's very bare bones because at the beginning we kind of it was mostly talk, but you can see we had 3 blocks a week and we allocated time for each other, and we would often go away after our meeting to say, okay, you're in charge of this, I'm in charge of that, you're in charge of the do now, and we would talk about how the class would run as a whole. So this planning time would happen at the beginning of the module and maybe on a bi-weekly basis. So we would plan 2 weeks in advance before the module. Yeah, so that was that. So that's a quick guide of our planning doc. So just about the statistics in particular, because obviously I'm the maths teacher in that module, and the standard that I decided to do was the inference, so 91264. So students, for their assessment, after all the teaching and learning, they were given a multivariate data set from the FBI website, where they would go through the PPDAC cycle and try to look at, I guess, answering a statistical question around the topic that we looked at in that module. So examples of, I'll quickly go over to this data set so you can have a look. So this was taken off. So students would, this would be the data set that be provided. I used a program from Listening, I think, where you can take a sample from, and students would choose a question, pick a couple of variables, and look at analyzing that data. So an example of investigations that students did. So here's an example question from a student of mine. So does the median murder rate in the northeastern states tend to be higher than the median murder rate in the western states in the United States of America for the year 2016? So they would take that question, use the learning they did from social studies as the kind of background and research, and yeah, and so they would go through the PPDAC cycle from there. I think one good thing about this unit was that the research component of 91264 was done naturally through the inquiry that they did for social studies. So their questions often was linked heavily to their social studies inquiry, which they did for their social studies teacher. Yeah, so that's an example of a unit that I did. I guess what I'll go through now is just some other things that I thought might be interesting to raise, and I don't know where everyone is in terms of their journey along integration, whether or not you've been asked by your schools to do an integrated unit, whether you're starting at year 9. As Andrew said, our school was purpose-built for integration. So here's a few notes. I guess there's a trade-off when you're integrating as a maths teacher. So there's this talk around the breadth of subjects, the breadth of math content versus depth that you go into. So our semesters were 16 weeks, so that's a term and a bit, a term and a half almost. And in that whole module, I only covered the one standard. So we were able to spend quite a lot of time going into the inference topic, getting students prepared to be able to do their inquiry, their PPDAC inquiry. Another question that people might have is, you know, that word rigor versus the authentic engagement. So how do students pick up enough maths to be able to do, I guess, like a level 3 statistics course or calculus course? Andrew will talk to the calculus more, but there's that trade-off between, you can't cover everything because there's that one standard per module and you have the students for 16 weeks. So it's more about getting the students authentically engaged in the context that we're covering. Another thing that kind of might come across, if you're deciding to integrate with another teacher, there's often students pick a module. Sometimes they're picking the module for the other subject. So I've taught quite a few PE modules, and you'll get students that are doing the module maybe for the PE or for the other subject. So you might have disengagement if you have that. There are also many ways to integrate. You don't necessarily have to do collaborative modules. You can integrate without co-teaching. So bringing in other subject areas like social studies and psychology and other things into your teaching is good. Some subjects obviously are better matches for maths than others. So as I said before, statistics is a lot suited towards the social sciences and the PE, physical education, because you can do experiments and look at the kind of like the before and after of physical activity, and with the social science it provides a nice context. And I think this is the last one. Yeah. So integrated unit does not mean that you will have integrated teaching and learning. So sometimes even in some of my units, you'll often have, you know, it gets too hard and you'll end up just splitting the time. So half maths, half other subject. And yeah, so that's not really an integrated unit because you're not really teaching together. I think the last point is for you to be able to integrate effectively, what I've learned is that you have to have a really good understanding of the standard, the clarifications, and assessment conditions, because they often don't align with the other subject that you're doing it with. So, for example, social science often do reports over the whole module, and that can be in conflict with the assessment practice that we do in statistics and maths. And we often repeated a lot of the standards. So I usually go to inference, because inference is quite a good topic that naturally lends itself towards other topics, and you tend to repeat standards that work well. So again, it's that breadth versus depth. Yeah. So that's what I have so far. And if you have any questions, just chuck them in the chat. All right. Cool. So I have to make you the host. Are you the host now, Andrew?
Jason, okay. You make me the host, and I'll.
Okay. All right. There you go.
Hold on. A couple more to admit. Thank you. I have a question here. Do kids get a little bored of learning the same thing for 16 weeks? Do you want to answer that, Jason?
What's that, sorry?
The question was...
Do kids get a little bit bored doing the same thing? 16 weeks, if you break it down, if you divide it into two, it's really only 8 weeks per subject. So no, because there's a lot that you can explore within a context, within a topic. So a lot of the module would be... so I guess the hook or the context has to be big enough for it to be engaging for the whole 16 weeks. So you can't have something too narrow. So something like gun violence in the USA would be able to be fleshed out over a long period of time, or something like a basketball unit in PE, where they can go through a lot of different things and a lot of practice. Yeah.
One thing to add to that is in a module, the students are not learning the same thing every time. When you sit down and plan a module, you realize this is 16 weeks with 3 big blocks every week. So you take that into account. You can't have students doing the same thing for that length of time. So that's why a module involves a lot of different learning, not necessarily, very much not tied to the assessment. This is one of the hardest things for teachers to get their heads around when first doing this, is to see the big picture of the context they're helping students to learn, and not get caught up in, we're trying to cover that standard or that standard and that's all. So try to get your head around that is quite difficult, but we try to add a lot more learning than what is the content of a particular standard. So that also, I think, helps answer that question. Yeah. Okay, no more questions just at this stage. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and maybe a third one if we get there. One thing from my point of view that really excited me about coming to the school was the fact that I've got some other interests other than maths. I love science. I did chemistry at university. I love music, and I love PE and sports science. So I was just really lucky to be able to connect with some of those teachers and do some dream modules for myself. I'll talk about the chemistry one. Got another person to admit. First, I'll give you a little hint about how we connected maths and chemistry. The standards, and I shouldn't start by talking about the standards, but I will. But the standards we looked at in the maths was the level 2 algebra 2.6, applying algebraic methods and solving problems. In the chemistry, it was level 2, the 2.6 external, demonstrate understanding of chemical reactivity. Okay, both level 2, both external. So we didn't even need to have a test as such, or even collect evidence towards the standard in order to award the standard. It was external. So that's quite a different one. And I'll talk about the complete opposite in a moment for a different module. So I was asked a lot about how do you get level 2 and level 3 algebra to be integrated genuinely in other subjects. And I did a bit of research, and there's such an excellent connection with this standard in chemistry because they deal with pH of acids and bases. And if you see my little flip chart here, my presentation. Can I bring it a bit closer? pH lends itself to logarithms. In the chemistry at level 2, they need to have some understanding of what pH is and what it means. So if I attempted to get the students to grasp this concept at the same time by just explaining to them something that is a very concentrated acid, pH 1, concentrated base, pH 14, a substance, a solution that's neutral, pH of 7. So where have these numbers come from? And of course, all the numbers in between as well. Here is what they learn in chemistry. They learn that the actual strength of an acid or base is measured by the concentration of what's called hydronium ions in a solution. Concentration. So that's measured for a pH of 1 at 0.1 moles per liter or something like that. 0.1, but the base at the opposite end of the scale is 14. And the concentration is 0.000, 14 zeros, so 13 zeros and a 1. And that's where the concentration ranges between. But the real key concept for students to grasp in chemistry or maths is that halfway, a neutral one, has 6 zeros, 6 zeros in total there for its concentration. And that, well, it doesn't make sense logically for a lot of students who are thinking linearly and linear scales all the time. But this is ideal for why we have logarithms in the first place, because the key thing is the number of zeros in these really, really small numbers. 1 0, 7 zeros, 14 zeros, and everything in between to describe, for chemists, to describe acids and bases. Where does that help us with the logarithms? Well, that's because we've got 1 times 10 to the minus 1 for that, 1 times 10 to the minus 7 for that, 1 times 10 to the minus 14 for that. So the chemist decides, well, that's our key number. That is the most helpful number to describe the concentration of an acid or base, not these fiddly decimals. So we attach a lot of importance to those. And from a mathematician's point of view, that's called the logarithm of that number. And I think that was a breakthrough for some of the students. They suddenly realized, oh, okay, so there's a use for these logarithms. And this clearly ties in with the chemistry we're trying to work with. There are a lot of equation solving that happens with the chemistry questions as well. So the students can see the connection here. And I won't go into the detail of all the equation solving that they had to do beforehand, or the other big area of the standard, which of course is quadratic equations. But one thing I did want to say is that we've got to remember that we've got year 11s and year 12s in this module. A lot of the year 11s won't have even the understanding of negative powers at this stage, at the beginning of this unit. So this, what I've just explained there, could easily be presented to the whole class at once at the beginning of the module, but then they will then have to be grouped. The whole class will have to be grouped. And this will be a big module, like 50 students, something like that, for students who have no idea why there's a connection with -1 here in this 0.1, the -7 and all those zeros. And I'm like, right, who doesn't understand that? We take them aside and we give them a rundown on basic whole number powers leading into negatives, so they can start to see the connection here. For those who have the connection already, there's a lot of things they can start doing now, is actually writing log equations, but we would have to have grouped them. Not all of them would be necessarily doing maths at the same time either in a module. So it could be the chemistry teacher takes half of them away to deal with the chemistry side of things, where I take half of them away who need to work on a certain aspect of understanding this. But there's a really nice connection for maths and chemistry. I'll just, before I get on to the next one, I have a quick check of the questions to see if there's anything significant to do with this. The start of pH scale is 0 and not 1. Oh yeah, thank you for that. Well done, yeah. Long time since I did chemistry, but I should have known for this module. So back even further. I'm making a 2-year structural plan for yeah. Yep, good. And the next one I can actually answer in an email later, so that's good. So I'm just going to move on to another module, and just very briefly mention what it was about, and it's the maths and music module that I ran last year, where we dealt with probability simulations at level 2, 2.13, internal. The music was the composition standard, 2.4. It also included 1.4. So this was a standard where the students had to create 2 musical compositions. And if it reached a particular standard, it would be at level 1. If it reached a particular standard, it would be at level 2. Now, how did we bring in maths here? There are so many big connections between maths and music that when I was doing my research, I had to narrow it down because I realized it's just too much to try to fit into one module. I even realized there is even an international organization that deals with just maths and music. They have conferences every second year, and there's books published on it. I didn't even realize that. So I had to narrow it down. I looked at how we could get some non-musical students to actually compose a piece of music by using some mathematical ideas to help them, because for a lot of students, they had not done music. They had no idea how to compose a piece of music or how composers do that. So we gave them a tool in maths to do that. And briefly, how did we do this? We started off with the students going away and listening to some music that they liked. We then got them to analyze the notes and come up with the ratios of certain notes in the scale that are in that particular melody that they analyzed. And they had various musical software to do this. And that way they had a list of all the notes in a piece of music, the ratio of those notes, and then they used those ratios to simulate another, or create a simulation of another piece of music with the same ratio of those notes as some means of creating a melody, or attempting to see if that would create a melody. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's exactly what they did. And in many situations, it was amazing what they ended up creating. Sometimes it didn't sound like much at all, but then the music teacher was then able to add some ideas for how they would transform that piece of music. Now I'm just going to show you, it'll help me explain some of this, some students' work on this one. Just share the screen here. So here in this document, you can see this is a portfolio task. So in this document, you've got work here, which will provide evidence for the standard for simulations. It also provides evidence for what the music teacher needed to have down on paper. And you can see the pink is the music, online music, what do you call it? Software that they were using, which actually displays visually each note and for how long it's playing. But I'll just move on. Here are the ratios that the student found, and you see she analyzed Mary Had a Little Lamb. They then ran a simulation by generating random numbers to create the different notes from the scale in the same ratio as Mary Had a Little Lamb, and that created a random piece, a random melody. They had to listen to that and actually had to decide, did that sound nice or not? Could they make something with this, or did it not work? So that's a little brief outline about what part of the module was about. Later on, what they did is attempt to answer the question, is it possible to randomly create a piece of a melody that does sound good? When I did the research, there's been university research even done on this, which some of the students found themselves. And they had to then do a simulation and record their results, record all the trials, and then they had to listen to it and to make a decision as to whether or not they found that that sounded a good melody or not. And of course, the music teacher had to play a lot of part in that. I do have recordings of what some of the pieces of music were like that the students came up with. But that's a brief outline of how that worked. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail. If you are interested, and you know teachers interested in connecting maths and music, let me know, because there's a huge amount there that I could add. Now I'll just see if there's any questions on that one at this stage. No more at this point, I don't think. Yeah, that's good. I'll briefly tell you about another one, which is maths and PE that I did a couple of years ago, where we were doing the experiments standard, level 2 experiments, and the students for PE were doing fitness testing, and they had to plan a training program. And I've got a passion for rock climbing, so we decided we'd head on down to the climbing gym and go there each week and do some climbing training and measure various aspects of their climbing ability at the beginning, measure it 6 weeks later, and then they would then write up their findings as to have they improved, have they not, have they met their goal. And we did a whole range of tests on even like grip strength, dead hang, a whole range of things. And that worked really well. It had a lot of engagement, and the students could see how important it was to take a little more care and detail with the maths in order to get the right result as far as the conclusions went. So that was very enjoyable module. Okay. So Jason, is there anything else you wanted to add at this stage? Because we've got a few questions coming up, which are the types of questions we'll probably have to actually write out your answer and email them to everybody.
I think there's a question there about assessment must be able to be judged separately in integrated standards. Yeah, so from our understanding, you can submit the same piece of work for both standards separately. Yeah, if that's what you mean.
I think, yeah, I think they mean that on one document, one portfolio task, can this be presented for 2 different subjects? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Yeah. We did a lot of work, professional development, about how to collect evidence and all the huge range of ways that it could be done. It doesn't have to even be a document. You can even a student could do recordings, they could do videos, or even a speech, and that can be sufficient to meet the standards for a portfolio task. Yeah. So yes, one piece of work can be used for more than one standard.
Yeah, so another, we do have time for the question. So they can pass one and fail another. So for example, I had a module where some students tried to attempt the level 3 inference in the same module as they were doing level 2 inference, because they were year 12, so they had already got enough level 2 credits. And so they didn't do enough for the level 3 inference, so they couldn't pass that, but it was the same piece of work. And that was all good. And that went through moderation fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Now the question here is, have you had a situation due to student numbers where you only had one teacher on a module who had to teach and assess outside the main subject area? And the answer is no. We wouldn't be expecting a teacher to try to assess. You wouldn't be expecting me to assess the chemistry here, for example, if I didn't know that the pH scale started at 0. So no, that was not the case. I think what has happened in the past where numbers are not ideal is that if the numbers were so few, like even if they were, I think in the first year, if it was 5 or 4, that module simply would no longer be able to go ahead, and students would have to re-choose.
Yeah, I think another thing is also where you've got students that are only doing one math standards maybe, or like, for example, they might have done inference, number, and trigonometry for the whole of their year 12 or year 11. We also offer like standalone specialist subjects. So students that do want to do calculus or statistics at level 3, do like a specialist line of single subject area math. So a lot of the stuff that we shared today was more around the contextualized authentic learning that the students can kind of experience in a module setting. And yeah, but if they do need that more specialized maths, for example, level 3 calculus, then they can do that specialist line alongside the modules. Yes. I have offered external exams in a module, and that worked okay. Students often, so for example, I did a P module where students were where I taught simulations, and then I offered the level 2 probability external to those that opted in. So externals are opt-in modules, and then if they're in a specialist line, then yeah, they do it as like a whole course. So students would do level 2 algebra and level 2 calculus in a specialist line course. But sometimes they would be offered calculus in a physics maths module. And endorsement, yeah, so it does definitely affects your endorsement chances. Our school made the decision that level 2 and level 3 endorsements were important, so the overall endorsement, but subject endorsements is a bit too, that wasn't a goal for any of our students. Yeah, so depends on your school philosophy and whether or not that's a priority. But again, some students do by chance, no pun intended, by chance do get endorsement at level 2. So if they do the probability external and manage to do enough stats throughout the year or maths, then they can get endorsed. But yeah.
And the question about external exams, do you teach these as options? That was the intention at the beginning, yes. One thing you need to know though about the way the school was organized is that there were 3 curriculums at the school, is how we put it. We had the academic curriculum, what we've been talking about with the modules. We had the advisory curriculum and project-based learning. Project-based learning was all of Wednesday and it was not assessed. The advisory curriculum was very much more than just a form class. It was a part of the school that was the key to making the modules work, and that is an advisor who knew each of their students in their advisory really well, and what subjects they'd chosen and what their intentions were, what their pathway was, and whether they were suited to doing external exams and whether that was worthwhile or should the energy be put into internals. So we attempted through the advisory program to personalize the journey of every student and try to track their progress throughout the year. So we knew if they were on track and what they would achieve or not. This was difficult because this was a lot of work for teachers, also a lot of work for students to really think deeply early on in the year, what are they doing and why? But it's very good, and I think it's key to the success of a program like this.
Yeah, I think another really important thing is it's so school specific, and depending on your setup and the overall school direction and philosophy, it will look different. So I am in contact with lots of teachers in other schools where they are integrating, but they're only really just integrating one of their classes within, like for example, they might be doing a statistics internal that they are also covering the same topic in geography. And so it's taught separately, but it's technically, I guess, an integrated learning because students are covering both same units in the same both classes. Whereas we in our school have integrated units that are co-taught with 2 subject specialists. And again, it's quite hard to sometimes get your head around, even for teachers at our school, because the tracking is really difficult. So if the students have already done inference in a previous module and I'm offering another module that has inference also, but they want to do the other subject, then you've got to make allowances for that. So it can be quite logistically challenging, but again, it depends on how your school is set up for it and what stage of the process you are. I know some teachers that I know are just trying to introduce other, I guess, context into their maths classes, and yeah, so it depends really. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Right, well, we're just about ready to wrap up, but thanks for joining us. If you please let us know as well if you are involved in integrating subjects. Feel free to email us with that sort of information and pass it on. We're going to have a closer look at the questions to make sure we have covered everything this evening. and I will be emailing everybody who's here and who hasn't turned up yet and may come to next week's one. There'll be a feedback form, links to any of the information that you want, and hopefully run this at the end of the year at our conference as well.
Yeah, and I think Andrew will send our emails out, so I'm happy to share examples of student work. Again, nothing we're doing is perfect at all. There's been standards that have come back from moderation, and we've been slammed, but we've adjusted, and we'll work really closely with NCEA. So yeah, we're happy to share, and you can only try, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope.
Very good, and thank you, Jason.
See you again. No problem.
Yep, joining us all the way from Korea. Okay, and thanks everybody. See you later.
See you.